that should be, that fixed it.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, hallelujah. All right, like I said, this is a little bit. This is the way it's been going this year. But anyway, thank you and welcome to the 2025 iteration of the Increment Report orientation. Glad you're here. I appreciate you joining. I can't see the chat box the way my screen is displaying, so I would just as soon you have a question, you interrupt me and ask it. Don't be shy about that. Just I'll hear it, and I would prefer to hear it rather than try to follow what's in the chat. If something does show up in the chat, I've asked Jeff to read it to me. So either way, but feel free to have a discussion and interrupt me, please. So this is my order table of contents. I'm going to talk about what the report is and what it's used for and what the process is, and kind of give an orientation to some of the parts of it. So to begin with, what the increment report is, as you can see from the title of this publication, is a compilation of economic value of agricultural and related ag products. It's an annual compilation of value of agriculture and ag-related products. And in the old days, it was a 13-volume book, like what you see being held here. We would create a volume, a book for every district, and in that book had values for various crop categories and livestock categories for every county in that district, and it aggregated up to the district level. And then we had a Texas book. The 13th book in the series was an aggregation from all the districts up to the state level. We still do that. We just don't do it in book form because, well, the book business is kind of expensive. So it lives, the contents of this paper publication now live as PDF files, and they live online, and they live at the AgEco Extension website, which is agecoext.tamu.edu. That's the general AgEco Extension website, and the Increment Report subpage lives underneath the resources menu, and there's also a couple of hot links to it right off the main page. If you click on any one of these, it'll take you to the Increment Report subpage, which has a number of things on it. There's something called, if there's a link that says all about the Increment Report, that's like a 1 or 2 page little descriptive blurb. The second link is a recording of the orientation. That would be the recording that we're doing right now. The one that's underneath that link right now is last year's, the 2024 year. What we're talking about today is ag values and ag related values for 2025. And in a week or so, we'll hopefully get the recording that we're going to make of today's session on YouTube and linked from that link there. And then there's 10 or 15 years of historical increment reports. If you click on those, it'll take you to PDF files of the 13 volumes. And then there's something new at the very bottom. There's something called County, District, and State Economic Impact Reports. What we've started to do for a few counties and a few districts, we have now done for all counties and districts, beginning with the 2024 year. We take the increment report numbers by county, and we generate economic impact using multipliers and figuring the economic impact to the state GDP and the jobs and all that good stuff. And so if you click on that link, it'll take you to your choice of counties. You can scroll down and find your county or your district or for the whole state. And I'm just going to pick Archer. And this is what the economic impact statement looks like. It takes your increment report numbers and uses them as cash receipts, and then it uses multipliers to generate economic output stuff downstream, and I think downstream economic impacts. And the value added is the impact on the state, the contribution to state GDP and the associated jobs by commodity. for a given county. And like I said, we do those at the district level. And so hopefully you would find these useful for interpretive events related to the value of agriculture in your district, in your county. So that's there. So as I've already mentioned, it's a compilation. The increment report, I don't know where the name increment comes from unless it refers to the incremental change of this year's numbers compared to last year's. That's the only thing. But it's kind of a strange name. But anyway, what is it? It's an online data source. It involves the economic value of agriculture and ag-related products for the calendar year. Okay. And the focus is on stuff that's produced on the farm. So it's the farm gate value, I would call it. And the calendar year we're talking about is the one that's just ending. So we're talking about 2025. And the emphasis is on production. Now this is where we can run into errors sometimes. So we want to focus on stuff that was produced during 2025. That means animals that were produced, meaning born and weaned and sold. So whatever livestock that would be. It also refers to weight gain on certain types of livestock, namely fed cattle and stalker animals. The weight gain itself is what was produced, and any other products that were sold besides annual crops and livestock. But the emphasis is on production. Where it can get confusing, we'll have people turn in stuff to us that essentially says something like, "Yeah, we have 1,000 horses in our county, and they're worth $800 a piece." And there you go. And I'm like, if you're telling me that for the increment report, what you're telling me is that 1,000 horses were born. You had 1,000 foals that were sold. That would be a proper measure of agricultural production in the last year. But if you're just saying there's 1,000 horses in our county, and they're worth this, that's more of a inventory type of number. That's not what we're getting at. We want to know the value of stuff that was produced in the last year. So let's just try to be clear about that. A lot of people use the increment report. The reason you and I do it is because administration uses it, and administration finds it useful for all kinds of things. They use increment report data for going over to Austin and talking to the legislature about the importance of the A&M system and why we need funding. That's a good reason. They use it for various needs assessment. They use it for their own administrative evaluations, and they use it for interpretive events with everybody, county judges and other county officials and state officials and federal officials. And speaking of state officials, a lot of there's a demand, particularly the comptroller's office, but other government officials at the state level call up wanting these data for various things. We get the administrative aides of federal, congressional members and senators, and they need something about agriculture in Texas, and they call us, and this is what we give them. And then other private sector uses by bankers and realtors and trial lawyers and researchers at A&M kind of use this stuff from time to time. So it's useful there, but it's mainly the reason we do it is because it's our administration finds good uses for it that ultimately help the system and help us. So you're helping yourself by doing a good job with it. There's other incidental questions that get from time to time, particularly like emergency use labels. There's not much data on minor use crops, and if you're trying to get an emergency use label to spray a pest on a minor use crop, the increment report is probably the only source of data that we can get for that sort of thing. And it gets used for disasters. We have a flood, stuff was damaged. Well, what was that worth? Well, we can use the increment report to answer that sort of question. So here's my motivational sermon. it's useful, but since we're going to do it, you and I you and I are saddled with this chore. It's always going to be done. Every place I've worked as an ag economist, as an extension economist, there was somebody whose job it was to coordinate an increment report type of project with the county agents in that state. I did it in Mississippi when I worked in Mississippi State, and I've done it here, and people have done it before me. It's every school in every land grant school with an ag eco department does this sort of activity because it's just too useful. So if we're going to have to do it, my sermon is to do it in such a way that it's good data and that it's useful, particularly useful for you, so that you can use it as interpretive information and can bolster your reputation as the local authority and expert on agriculture in your county. All right. Now here's the slide that's going to embarrass me, but anyway, here's the normal process. The normal process is that sometime around Halloween, a memo goes out from the fifth floor. I'm in the AGLS building. The fifth floor is the administration's up there. Dr. Kelm sends out a message that basically says, "Heads up, AgEco is about to email you guys a lot of stuff related to the increment report." Okay, well they did that on time. They did it November the 3rd. You did get an email from Dr. Kelm. And usually within a week, the first week of November, AgEco sends out increment report forms, what needs to be completed, and a few useful attachments, hopefully useful. This year we're 6 weeks late. For various reasons, we had technical glitches. The increment report in our world is a great big Excel database with thousands of linkages between cells, and something got messed up. And so we couldn't generate what we needed to generate to send to you until just this last week. And as a matter of fact, the last things that got sent out, it was like 1 o'clock Sunday morning was when we finished. I say we loosely, my graduate student did it. Anyway, we're way late, but you should have received your county specific increment report from us probably within the last few days, along with a few other attachments. There's actually something else that's coming by email, hopefully today, definitely this week, related to livestock parameters. So hopefully everything will have gotten out to you. But if for some reason um, you can't find an email from me, or you misplaced it, let me know. Just email me. We'll resend it, or give me a call. My contact information is going to be at the end of this presentation, and we can resend it. And my apologies for messing up. I know I created some confusion. I had agents calling me saying, did I miss the email? Did I miss the distribution?" No, you didn't miss anything. We're behind. And I also know for a fact that some of you early birds would have knocked out your increment reports in the month of November, getting a head start on it, and we prevented you from doing that. And I'm honestly sorry. I don't know what else to say, but we'll try to do better. What else? So then the process, when you receive the increment report form, the task is to collect information from your county, from primary data sources, talking to ag producers and talking to your ag committees and to cotton gins and grain elevators and livestock sale barns, and however you get your primary data, doing that plus secondary data that we are providing you, and then complete the increment report form, which basically involves calculating economic values. This kind of stuff was produced, and this kind of stuff has this associated price or value to it, and multiplying that through. And we've got some tools to hopefully make that a streamlined process. All that gets turned in to your DEAs at the end of January. And then we spend February, March, and April error checking it and putting it into the database. And then we update those PDF publications with the new data, you typically by May. So that's That's the normal process. Like I say, it broke down a bit. Hopefully we can get back on our feet. And if you need any help from us in replacing stuff that you think you should have got that you didn't get, let me know and we'll send it out. So the final product, what we're driving for, as I've kind of hinted at, is calendar year 2025 value of production. This is when I say the increment report form, this is what I'm referring to. Something that looks like this, that's got a few columns, several columns of numbers from the immediate previous years, and then 2025 is blank here, and that's what needs to be filled in. Now I'll point out something. It says thousands of dollars up there in the top of this chart of numbers. The numbers on this chart, for example, the food corn number in 2024 says 38.1. What that means is $38,000, $38,100, because all the numbers in this chart are expressed in thousands of dollars. So keep that in mind when you're doing calculations. When they wind up on this chart, they need to be divided by 1,000 to be in the right format. Okay. As you might expect, I'll dwell on this for a second. We're asking you for the value of agricultural production. So that's units of stuff times a price per unit. We try to get at those you can imagine a bunch of calculations if you had acres of crops and yield per acre and a price per unit of that commodity. You'll be gathering that kind of stuff and multiplying that kind of stuff together. And so we provide hopefully a relatively straightforward, simple tool to do that sort of thing, which we call the increment report worksheet. It's just an Excel file, it's just a calculator. It's like a crescent wrench. You could use other tools. You could build a fancier tool than this, or you can do it on paper. I really don't care. I've created this worksheet calculator just to keep things organized. And this one shows the crops worksheet, which has columns for acres of a particular crop, yield of a particular crop. The cells in these columns are tan. That means you can type in them. If the cells are gray, then you can't type in them. There's formulas here. This third column that says volume produced is basically acres times yield per acre to give you a certain quantity of, in this case, white corn. Then the fourth column is a tan you can type in here, and it's asking for prices. So if you put numbers in the three tan cells in the white corn row, you're going to have acres, and the third column will do the multiplication for you. Acres times yield per acre, you multiply that number times the price, and you wind up with this last column, the 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth column is the value of production, that's what we're driving at. And this is what gets translated back to there. What's in that column with the red circle gets translated back to that column with the red circle. The only difference is that here it's the actual number, and here it's the number expressed in thousands. So for example, if you had wheat here, if you had $50,000 worth of wheat production here, and in this table, it would be expressed by the number 50 because it's already in thousands of dollars. Okay. So that's the worksheet, and I'm going to spend some time talking about how to type stuff into the worksheet and what it does. I don't think this worksheet is, God's gift to economics. It's like I say, it's like a crescent wrench. It's just hopefully useful to keep things straight and help guide you. That's why we created it. What we would ask is if you use this worksheet, or for that matter, if you use a Big Chief tablet and a pencil and an eraser, whatever you use to make calculations, it is really, really helpful for us to, if you include your calculations, include this worksheet. You could save it as an electronic Excel file, change the name to reflect your county, or you could make a PDF out of it. I don't really care how we get it. Um, but having your calculations with whatever data you had about acres and yield and prices helps us in the error checking process. It helps us a lot. So I'm just going to encourage you to please send this in along with your completed report form. When we error check these things, a lot of times we'll get increment report forms that are straightforward. They make sense. Numbers appear to be correct. If it looks like that, we're just going to kind of rubber stamp it. We get some increment report things back that have identifiable errors, like the wheat number is 200 times more than it's been in the last 3 years, and so we take a look at it, and it turns out that there's a typo, and you were multiplying a bunch of bushels of wheat times a price that's actually expressed in dollars per bushel. A bushel price times a hundredweight price, something mismatched. That results in errors. We usually recognize those errors. We'll recognize them faster if we have your actual calculations and your data, and if it's in the worksheet, we can see it a lot quicker. Those kinds of things happen. We just, when we recognize that kind of error, we just correct it. Sometimes we'll find big differences that we can't explain. And that happens from time to time. And when we don't have the calculations, then that leaves us either having to make assumptions about what you meant to put, or it leaves us having to call you up and say, your crops numbers, 5 out of 7 of your crops numbers are 500 times bigger than normal. What is that, a typo, or why is that? And you don't, I'm quite sure you don't want us making assumptions about what's going on with your numbers, and you probably, even worse, don't want us calling you to get the answer. So I would say, with your calculations, check your numbers and show us your calculations. Okay. All right. A little bit more on the details of the kind of data you would need to collect to calculate ag value of production. With crops, it's really straightforward. As I've kind of alluded, it's harvested acres times yield per acre, times the price per unit. So beginning with acres, how can we get information about acres in your county of the major crops? Well, there's a number of different places where you can get what I'm going to call primary data. That's where you go out and essentially ask people. You're essentially surveying people who would know. You go to your gin and ask them, how many acres of cotton are in the county this year? I'll bet you they have an opinion about it. Or your grain elevator for grain crops, or livestock slaughterhouses, or processors, or sale barns. They're in the volume business, and they probably have a pretty good idea about the acres, or the volumes of animals, the herd size in the county, whether it's higher, whether it's lower. So those would be sources of primary data. If you have regional commodity organizations like, Plains Cotton Growers in the 41 county region of the High Plains, or there's a couple of rolling plains cotton producing organizations. There are grain producing organizations at the regional, state level. Those people generally have a pretty good idea about acres for their particular commodity. The best source, I'll just cut to the chase, of getting where you can get detailed information about the acres of stuff in your county, is this fourth bullet down here called USDA FSA. That stands for Farm Services Agency Certified Acreage. I'm going to go through this example because I think everybody ought to be able to get the certified acres for their county. If everybody did it, not just for the increment report. If you downloaded the certified acres of stuff in your county, you would be by the bona fide agricultural expert of what's going on the ground in your county if you just do this on a regular basis. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time showing how to do that. There's also another source. The certified acres shows you how much those data come out in the summertime and they're updated in the fall for the year in question. So this is also, for calendar 25, that's another reason that we want to use certified acreage. But if you're new to a county and you're just kind of wanting to get a kind of a profile of what's grown, the major crops, this last bullet that says historical USDA NASS data, that's another way to just get familiar with the major crops in your county. If you click on that link, it'll take you to this website, which we refer to as the Quick Stats website, because it's got all these linkages by every crop that say Quick Stats, and you click on those Quick Stats, and then it'll give you a choice of county. Click on your county. It'll tell you the acres and the yield and the production of major agricultural crops in your county. It'll also, down here at the bottom, clicking on the livestock links, it'll give you the cattle inventory and all cattle inventory in your county as of January 1st. So now this is the certified acres. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because like I say, I think if everybody did this, that you would definitely be the bona fide expert in what's happening on the ground in your county. So to get to the certified acre, frankly, to get to the certified acres, all you got to do is Google FSA certified acres and you'll get to this link. But here's the link. You click on that link. Oops, I didn't want to click on that link. I wanted to do that. If you click on that link, it's going to pull up this page here. The latest certified acreage numbers are as of December the 9th, if you look where that arrow is pointing. So if you click on that, what it's going to do is download a folder to your downloads folder. If you're in Windows, and even if you have an Apple machine, you have a downloads folder where everything you download shows up in that folder. It'll download a zipped folder into your downloads folder. You click on the zipped folder and there's a file in it. This is the file, 2025 FSA acres web 12125, a long unwieldy name. If you click on that, it's going to open an Excel file. It looks like this. Okay. And this Excel file has multiple tabs, and you want to click on the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th tab that says county data. All right. This may sound complicated. It's really not. It downloads a folder, click on the folder, click on the one file that's inside that folder, opens this up, click on the county data tab. And if you do that, it's going to pull up this massive sheet of data. And what this is every county in the United States. You could scroll way down here to Texas counties and then your county, or you can go up here to the 4th column heading where it says states and that little down pointing arrow. If you click on that, it'll pull down a menu and you can select Texas, and then you can pull down over here in the 5th column. You can pull down a menu for counties. You can get to your county data faster, but when you get there, what it's going to look like is it'll have like this, wheat, corn, beans, sorghum, a whole bunch of minor crops, a whole bunch of different forage crops. It's very detailed, and it gives you more typology of the crop they're talking about and the intended use, and whether it's irrigated or not. And then it has the planted acreage of that crop, of that type, of that intended use. And it has how much of it was failed, and it has the sum of planted. And anyway, it gives you a ton of data about what's on the ground in your county. And this is what I would use if you're starting from scratch and doing calculations about the value of row crop agriculture. This is what I would use. I would get the data for all this stuff, at least the major crops, and I would use that as you're getting planted acreage from that. You need to make an assumption about how much of that planted acreage was actually harvested. And then you can use the harvested acres, what you're assuming is harvested acres, as the calculation towards value of production. All right, so that was acreage. Again, the best source of getting secondary data for acreage in your county is this, the FSA certified. So I would just say get familiar with that. Do it every year. Don't do it for the increment report. Do it every year so that you just have this file on your computer, uh, and you can see at a glance what's on the ground crop wise. All right, the next thing after acres, the next thing is you need to have some notion of the yield per acre so that you can multiply yield per acre times acres to come up with the third column, and the calculator will do the multiplying, but you have to put in a yield number into this second column here. Where do you get yield data from? Well, you could get it from various places. I'll skip to this slide here. If you have a crops committee, you could ask them. They're presumably knowledgeable. You could say, what do you think was the average yield of these major crops this year? And they'll probably give you an opinion. You could ask your agronomist the same question. They probably have an opinion. You can't get current year yield data from National Ag Statistics Service, but you can get the last couple years of data. If those years were normal, then you could use them to kind of benchmark what's a normal yield. Again, that'll take you to the quick stats link if you click on that. So there are various sources that you could ask. Fact is, you could use, for those of you that do field trials, yield trials, that's you could use the average data from that trial as a estimate of the yield of that crop in your county. So there's various sources that I think you can come up with an estimate of what the yield was. This is just that quick stats site. Again, you click on corn, select your county, and it'll give you a recent couple years worth. Again, it's not going to give you 2025, but it'll give you recent history, which may be useful. So anyway, you put in yield data, put in acres harvested. That's going to automatically calculate in these gray cells the product of those two items there. Thing about cotton, I'll go back to here. Cotton has cotton lint and cotton seed, and basically you'll notice the cotton seed cells are gray. You can't type in them. They're driven off a formula of whatever you type in for the yield of lint. It's going to automatically calculate the yield of seed, and it's going to use the acres of cotton that you have up here in the lint cell. And so it'll calculate the volume of lint and the volume of seed, and you'll still need to provide a price, which we're going to talk about in a second, a price of lint and a price of seed. So cotton has got that feature built into it. You're basically working off the lint estimate. Okay. That gets us to here. So we've got a volume calculated by the worksheet. We need to multiply that total volume across harvested acres, that total volume times some sort of price, and that's what's given us the value of production. Here's the production, here's the value. This last cell on the right, which is where we're driving, is the multiplication of price times the volume. So where do we get price data from? Well, again, we can get price data from primary sources. You can ask cotton gins, cotton elevators. Elevators buy grain, so they have a posted price. Cotton gins often have somebody that helps the growers sign contracts or identify merchants to sell to. And so a lot of times the gin personnel will have some notion about what the price is, or whatever your crop is, packing sheds, again, slaughterhouses, feedlots, etc. Lenders, if you play golf with a local ag lender, lenders always have a notion of what the local price, they use that in their loan calculations. So they've got thoughts about it, as do the regional commodity groups. You can also ask Ag Eco, if you're talking about cotton, you can message me. What do you think the average price of cotton was in my district or my county? I'll give you my opinion. If you're dealing with livestock, you could ask David Anderson, but I've already provided a sheet of livestock prices and values from David Anderson. So I've done that work for you. And if you have a question about grain prices, you can contact Mark Welch and just ask him, what do you think an average price of grain sorghum was this year in my county? And he'll give you an estimate. So you can call it your extension Ag Eco specialist for that. Let's see. We're talking about prices. All right. USDA publishes prices for the year in question, the year that we're in. If you click on that link right there, it'll take you to a website called Ag Prices. And if you click over here on the right, it'll show you the latest available ones. And you click on that PDF and it'll pull up a document that'll have major crops and the monthly average. It's either the monthly average price or it's the season average price to date. But anyway, it's a price that you could use. It's kind of it's either a statewide or a national price, but it's an approximate price that you could use for commodities, probably crops in your county. All right. You plug in that price information with volume already calculated. It's going to calculate what we're driving at, which is the value of crop production, and it'll do that automatically. And remember that once these are the numbers you want, but they're expressed in thousands on the increment report form. So again, if you had a number here that was $100,000 in production value on the increment report form, it would be expressed as the number 100 because that's already expressed in thousands. Okay, so just to summarize, we've been talking about crops. We've been talking about getting at the value of the 2025 production of crops. It's the easiest thing to do it with crops because it's the straightforward multiplication of acres times units per acre times the price in dollars per unit. And the worksheet will make some of those calculations for you. Now let's talk about the categories themselves. We kind of have the increment report just by tradition classifies crops in these ways, either food crops with the ones shown, or feed crops, cotton sorted by itself, oil seeds. We have bushels in parentheses, so make sure that your yields are in these units and that your prices are in these units to avoid the most common error, which is multiplying a dollars per hundredweight price times a volume that's in bushels. That happens frequently. Just more stuff here about the different kinds of crop categories and classification. One thing, there's 3 kinds of corn. White corn in this world is a food crop. Yellow corn is a feed crop. So yellow corn is under here. White corn is under here. And sweet corn doesn't show up in the crops worksheet at all. Sweet corn shows up in the vegetable worksheet. So just kind of know that there's nothing sacred about this classification. It's just sort of traditional. If you have a strong opinion that something ought to be reclassified, send me a message, and we probably won't do it in the middle of this process, but we may do it over the summer if you can sell us on a better way to do it. a better way to classify stuff. Uh, the crops, the various hays and forages, other than alfalfa. Don't ask me why, but alfalfa in the increment report classification shows up under miscellaneous crops, even though it's a forage. All the other forages, all the other hay crops show up under feed crops, as does silage. And we've got various oilseed things, which are often under contract. Sunflowers and sesame and whatever are often contracted, so there's less public information about the prices and the volumes and the yields. So the best source of data about acres and prices for oil crops is talking to the growers themselves and asking them what their contract prices were and what their average yields were. I've already mentioned that cotton is driven off what you enter for lint. Yield determines automatically what the cotton seed yield is, and you have to still provide the price of lint, the price of seed. Very common error with cotton is that people will put in a price. Let's say the price they want is 64 cents per pound. Well, they'll put in essentially $64 per pound, and we'll notice it because their cotton value is 100 times higher than it normally has been in the previous couple of years, and it's because the price is expressed in dollars instead of cents. So just be careful. Be careful about units. Be careful about decimals. There's a vegetable crops worksheet. It's very similar to the crops one. It just has a whole bunch of different line items for different vegetables. I'm not gonna dwell on it. The one point I'll make is that if you're talking to a packing shed or a grower about the yield of vegetable crops, they may give you some weird sounding units like, 2/3 bushel baskets of this crop or that crop. Or it may get expressed in hundredweights, but anyway, just pay attention to the units. There are some strange units that are standard in the vegetable horticultural industry. This is what the worksheet looks like with vegetables up above and miscellaneous crops down below. Again, long list of stuff. I'll make a point about the nursery crops. Typically, if you're talking about nursery stuff, potted plants, that those don't involve planted acres, harvested acres, yield per acre. They typically involve just the inventory of nursery plants, and if you're getting information from a nurseryman, he may tell you, well, my bedding plants in 2025, we sold 4 million. He may just give you a number. You could include it in this worksheet by typing the number into the, let's see, how would you do that? You could just type the number into the price column, type the number itself. So there's ways to express it on the worksheet, not necessarily as a multiplication. Oh, what else? Under miscellaneous crops is a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, alfalfa lives there, and then guar and other stuff, and the nursery, seed. All right, that brings us to livestock, which is kind of different, as you know. One thing about livestock compared to row crops, livestock, if you have a certain herd size in the state and in your region, it takes a while for that to change. It's the inventory has a fixed quality to it, so that plays into how many there are. But there are trends in livestock populations, so it's good to be aware of that. We know about the cattle cycle. There's cyclical trends, so it's good to know kind of where we are. And certain things can drastically change the the inventory of animals, drought being a major one and integrators being the other major one. So sometimes there are big shifts, and we'll see those on the increment report. We'll have somebody with chickens in their county, and they had chickens 5 years ago, and they had chickens 3 years ago, and they had chickens last year, and this year it's zero. And we may think that's a typo, but if we call them up, or if they leave a note that says the integrators closed out and left our county, well, that explains why it went from something to zero. So those kinds of things can happen. So it's just a consideration of livestock. Another typical livestock consideration is that you're either dealing with weight gain, expressed economically as the added value, or you're dealing with whole animal values, dollars per head of goats or calves or whatever. So again, it goes back to an early point I made. It'd be very clear about what the production is you're talking about. The whole animal, the production is the animal, baby horses, baby calves, breeding stock, or old animals that you're culling as individuals. They have a value per head, and if you know the number of culls, you multiply that through, and that's the volume. Production is the creation of an animal or the destruction of an animal, but so it's births or culls. Then there's the value added, which really applies to fed beef and applies to stockers. And here the production is weight gain. So you have a starting weight and a price for that per hundredweight. You have an ending weight and a price per hundredweight for that animal. And the difference between the value of the starting weight and the value of the ending weight is the gain, assuming it's positive. And hopefully this year it definitely is. We designed the livestock worksheet calculator to streamline some of those kinds of calculations, particularly if you have data like what we get from David Anderson, the cheat sheet, which is going to be emailed to you. So hopefully, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time working through those examples. I want to contrast the second bullet with the third one. We very commonly will get things on the increment report that if you look at case one, somebody on the beef value added line, he'll put under volume, he'll put 10,000 head. And under value, he'll put $2,000 per head. Well, what that tells me is that he's saying that there was $2,000 worth of gain on 10,000 head of cattle. That's what it's telling me. If he put it in the increment report, that's how I interpreted it. A lot of times I'll get these kinds of statements, and I don't think the agent is actually saying that there was $2,000 worth of gain on 10,000 head. I think what he's telling me is there's 10,000 cows in my county, and they're worth this. He's expressing the value of an inventory, which is not what we're driving at. We're driving at the value of production. So sometimes agents will report that kind of thing incorrectly. They didn't mean to say that there was that much value of weight gain. They were trying to say something else, which is, it's nice to know, the value of the inventory of cattle in your county, but that's not what we're getting at with the increment report. Another example, which shows up every year in a few instances, is that somebody will do the same thing with horses. He'll say, well, I got 1,000 horses and they're worth $800 per horse on average. Well, you put that in the increment report, what it's telling me is that there were 1,000 foals and that they were sold for an average of $800 per horse. That's what you're telling me, is that 1,000 horses were born. And if that's true, great. But a lot of times what I think is going on is that the agent is simply reporting the value of the inventory of horses in the county, which is, well, it's a nice thing to know. That's not what we're getting at with the increment report. All right, here's the livestock worksheet. I've got a couple numbers in it that I'll explain. Down here at the bottom are two boxes that we can use to calculate the value added of weight gain for fed cattle and also for stockers, whatever type of stockers you have. And I got those numbers from David's cheat sheet. So they'll automatically calculate the difference, the, the added value, which is the difference in the gain. Let me show you an example. So if we're talking about fed cattle, here's some numbers. Here's a 7.62 hundredweight is the starting weight, and that animal was worth $313 per hundredweight. When it's a finished animal, it's heavier. It's almost 1,400 hundredweight. The price is 221.72 per hundredweight. You multiply those through, you get values that reflect the difference between those two values is the value of the weight gain. Okay. Now I'm not a livestock person and I'm easily confused, but I can pretty much follow that. Beginning weight, beginning price per hundredweight. Ending weight, ending price per hundredweight. I think that minus that is going to give you the value, the increased value of that animal. So it's a per head number. It's the increased value gains by the weight gain of that animal. Okay. The numbers themselves, the starting weights, the finishing weights, the prices associated with them came from David, which this is going to be emailed to you. It's down here and where it says fed cattle. Those are the exact same numbers that I just plugged in to the worksheet. And if you plug them into the worksheet, you do the fed cattle numbers here. These are the same numbers: ending weight, beginning weight, ending weight price, beginning weight price, multiplying through to that and taking the difference. And then this thing will automatically grab that $713 number and put it in the right place on the fed cattle value added line. And then all you got to do is type in the volume, the head of fed cattle. I just typed in 1,000. So that times that equals that. And that's how to get at the fed cattle value added. Hopefully it makes it more straightforward. We know what you're doing. If we see these numbers down here and see that number up here, then it's easier to understand when it's streamlined like that, and it's clear what the multiplication is. You can do the same thing with stocker animals. So this is a summer stocker example. Again, this is the ending weight. This is the value per hundredweight of the ending weight cattle at that time of the year. That's the multiplication of that. This is the beginning weight. This is the price per hundredweight of the lighter stocker, multiplying through for that. This is the difference between the ending weight value and the starting weight value, is that. You can plug those numbers. I got those numbers from David. If you had winter stockers, you can use these numbers here. I don't have an example for the worksheet, but winter stockers would work the same way. And you plug them in down here in this, whether it's winter stockers or summer stockers, you plug them in down here. These are the same ones that were in the example: the ending weight, the beginning weight, the ending weight value price per hundredweight, the beginning weight price per hundredweight, multiplying through, which this does automatically and takes the difference automatically. And the difference is 461, which gets pulled up automatically onto the proper line for stocker cattle. And I just put in 2,000 head, which that multiplies that through to that value. These would get translated to your increment report, but you'd have to express them in thousands. So that would be 922. That would be 713. Okay, so those are the added value examples. What about where do you get those 1,000 head of fed cattle or 2,000 stockers? Again, you talk to your livestock committee, talk to feedlots, talk to slaughterhouses, talk to your animal science experts. And in the case of winter stockers, you could kind of back into it using certified acreage data on small grains, particularly if you are in the rolling plains where that kind of thing is common. And I'll quickly run through an example of that. This is a rolling plains example. If you go through that process of getting your certified acres data that I went through back when I was talking about crop acres, you would zero in on wheat with this code grazed out, or grazed and then grain, GS and GZ. It'll tell you how many acres you have of those types of wheat. And then basically, if you know the acres and you know the stocking rate, you can divide the acres by the stocking rate. You know that early stocking, I'm taking this for granted. I'm not a livestock person, but in this example, it suggests that 3 acres per calf is an early season stocking rate for winter stockers. So you could take your acres of early grazed stuff, which is the sum of those two. The acres of early grazed stuff divided by the stocking rate is going to give you the number of calves. And for the graze out, you've got this many acres, and it's a lower stocking rate. So you divide 7,989 acres by the lower stocking rate of 1.25, and it'll give you that many calves for the later graze out. And with those calves, you can plug those numbers down into here. If this was a winter stocker example, you'd plug them up here into the volume of stocker cattle. That would apply to winter stockers on small grains. All right, now we're going to shift gears, get away from value added weight gain. Now we're talking about whole animal livestock, which is generally reflected as sales per head and the associated price, the associated value of so many heads. So we're talking about calves, which are born and weaned and sold. That's a per head kind of thing. It also includes breeder cattle, includes cull cattle and cull bulls, and a whole lot of these. You can get data to figure, particularly culls and calves. You can get data from the cow inventory and the cattle inventory that USDA provides at the county level from the Quick Stats website that I mentioned before. That is this link right there. So if you go back to the Quick Stats link, you want to know how many cows there are in your county, you click on that Quick Stats, go down and choose your county, and it's going to tell you something. This is a few years old, but it's going to give you some data. Cattle, cow inventory data. This is beef cows, and those are the number. This is the number I think that you'd want to use, the number of cows in your county, and most recently would be January 1 of 2025. If you have that inventory number, let's say that in your county you go to that Quick Stats, you find out from the inventory that there's 9,200 cows. You can make a few assumptions about the percent weaning. That would give you this many calves. If you had 83% weaning, then that many cows results in this many calves. Split that in half. Half of them are bulls, half of them are heifers. Make an assumption about how many of the heifers are retained. So you're assuming 20% of the heifers are kept and the rest are going to be sold. So you're holding back this many heifers. That gives you, in terms of calves to sell, you've got this many steers. That was the steer half. and the heifers that are not being retained. And for each of those, you assume it's 4.75 hundredweights, and you assume that the sales prices are here. And I got both of these from David. That multiplies through to a value. This is $1 per hundredweight, multiplies through times $1 per head value, comes out to a rather large number related to the steers and related to the heifers that you're selling. Now, there's only one line. I got those numbers from David right up there, the steers and the heifers. There's the average price. In the worksheet, there's only one line for, and it's this line here, other beef, calves, beef. There's only one line for, it isn't broken out by heifer calves and steer calves. So this reflects a combination of a weighted price per head of steers. It's weighted more towards the steers because there's more of them, but the weighted price of the steers and the heifers that you're selling times the combination of number of steers and heifers that you're selling. I'm backing up, calculating that weighted price you can do in this step right here. Basically add together the total value of the steers, the total value of the heifers you're selling gives you a $10.6 million total value. Divide that by the total number of animals. This is 5,796 is the heifers that you're selling plus the steers that you're selling. Divide the total value by the total head, and it gives you a weighted price per head, and that's what that is, and then it'll multiply through back to your $10 million number. That's how to put it into the worksheet. But the key to this whole thing is basically you're starting with the number of cows and making 2 or 3 assumptions about weaning percentage and retained heifers, and that they're 50-50 bulls and heifers, and work from there using David's numbers. And you can do the same thing figuring out cull cow values. Again, I'm going to use the same example. Here's a county where the cow inventory is 9,200. You can assume a cull rate. You can get that. You can use this, or you can get it from an animal scientist. A cull rate for cull cows. So this implies that if there's that many cows in the county, this many of them would be sold. You're assuming that they're 10 hundredweights and that they're selling for $145.80 per hundredweight. You get that from David. And you come up with a value which goes on the other beef slaughtered cattle line. There's the numbers that you can get for cull cows and cull bulls from David. This is the calculation, what you would do to do the same thing for cull bulls. You have to make one other assumption of a cow per bull ratio, cow per bull ratio of 25-1. Suggests you have that many bulls. Use David's prices, come up with a total value for that. It's also going to go on the other beef slaughter cattle line. So this last step shows how you can, again, combine the two, the total value divided by the total head, to give you a weighted value, which shows up here. Other beef slaughter cattle. This has the combination of cull bulls and cull cows. If you only have one of those, then you could just fit it right on there. Other things that go in the value of animal production in your county may include poultry if you're in that part of the state, or goats and sheep and lambs, and horses, which I've already mentioned. We're not interested in just the general horse trading that goes on with the existing inventory. We're only interested in what is produced, that is, what is born, what is foaled and sold. Then there's ag-related income associated with different stuff. You can see the different kinds of things. I'll make one comment about timber. A few years ago, one of the East Texas agents called up and said, and with a proposal, this is a good example. He and his colleagues had thought about this. He said, I think we ought to standardize the lumber or the timber value here. They publish it. Texas A&M Forest Service publishes it. They publish every 3 years or so for 40 counties. A publication like this where they calculate certain values, and I'm going to pick Angelina County. The proposal was that this timber lumber stumpage value ought to be the combination of these 3 items: forestry, logging, and primary solid wood products out of this publication. I said, hey, man, that sounds good to me. So now this doesn't come out every year. So I would say for 2025, you could use 2024 as a baseline and adjust it accordingly. But I think that would be a good source of getting at that number, which is expressed in this publication as millions of dollars. So other stuff, other worksheets, there's a worksheet for hunting and leasing, and it kind of really gets at different types of hunting leases, and there isn't really a right way to do this. Just hunting lease arrangements are different in different places, so whatever fits in your area, reflect that on this sheet. That's fine. It'll help if you go over here, and I hadn't mentioned this yet, but every one of these worksheets has this big square area. You can type in here. If you click on it and start typing, you can just type a big run-on sentence, and it'll wrap around until you hit return. So you could leave me notes like, hey, this involves leases, certain types of leases, dollars per gun, dollars per animal, whatever it is. You can leave notes to explain the numbers that you're putting in here. Would be appreciated. Also, a couple years ago, some East Texas agents called up and said, how should we handle fishing, particularly fishing tournaments? I thought, well, I've never thought of that. How should you handle it? And we kicked that out. He was like in a group of agents having a meeting right there, and they wanted an executive decision. Well, I'm too ignorant to give them an executive decision with knowledge, but I listened to him, and I thought, for a tournament, the only thing that made sense to me, if I'm remembering this correctly, was you have to pay an access fee to fish on the lake at all during a tournament. And so that access fee could be viewed as the value of fishing, because you're paying it and then you're experiencing fishing on that lake that day. So that was the answer to that question at that time. But if you have other questions about how to capture some of these things, like I say, give me a holler, and we can make an executive decision maybe for the following year if it needs time to implement. But these things are flexible, so use them to fit your needs. I'll just skip over some of these variations in hunting stuff. All right, so we're at the end. Just remember, you give it a run through, particularly if you use the worksheet, make sure that the worksheet numbers jibe with the report form numbers. Most of the time they do. Occasionally there's a one little typo discrepancy. We'll get 3 or 4 increment reports that the worksheet has calculations, which I appreciate, and they send us the worksheet, which I really, really appreciate. And the calculations on the worksheet are 100% different than what's on the report form. It is as if 2 different people filled them out, which is what I typically assume happened. So-and-so started working on it. So-and-so completed the worksheet. So-and-so had to take his wife to the hospital, and somebody else finished the increment report, and they didn't reference or even maybe know about what was on the worksheet. They're that different. And if we get those kinds of things, I'm going to assume one of them is right, and I'm not sure which one is. So I'll probably be calling. But anyway, you can double check. And also remember that on the increment report form, the values are in thousands, while on the calculations on the worksheet, it's the actual numbers. All right, I think that's just everything I said. All right, enough preaching. So here's my contact info. I encourage you, you got a question, call me on my cell phone and leave a message and I'll call you back, or email me and I'll definitely email you back. And with that, I'm going to get out of the PowerPoint and open it up to questions or complaints. This year, I ought to open it up to any complaining that you want to do.